Hello everyone. I just said to Phil before, this is a very strange experience for me because I really love chatting with people even long before I speak to find out what your personal needs are. But a large number of you I know personally from having worked in your schools or by being colleagues. And it's, thank you very much for joining in today and feeling that you're going to get something out of it. A lot of you are on holidays, so that's especially great. And I can't see anything at the moment other than someone's names on the screen, so this is really weird. Anyway, what I want to do today is really, I'm going to be very, very straightforward and practical and try and help everybody think from a common sense point of view about the teaching of spelling. And it's always been something that parents want to know about, teachers want to know about. Kids need to feel that they are competent at spelling because somehow or another it just really affects them dramatically if they're not. They don't like to write as much. It doesn't affect all kids that way, but it certainly does with some. And it's interesting that in the last couple of years when we in Melbourne, and I'm not in Melbourne, but I'm part of Greater Melbourne, we've been in lockdown for well over 200 days of that time. And I've worked with a lot of children online from many schools around the state and one interstate. And always the parents have asked me to help their children with spelling. And it's been very interesting for me to see what the work is that's been going home from schools for children to do in spelling. In some cases, it's been nothing. And I don't blame teachers for that. It's been a very difficult time to work online. And I think in the main, they're not quite sure what they could do with the kids when they're not with them. Often that falls back to parents, and even in a normal situation, spelling in schools often is kids being sent home for kids to learn, the words to learn, but the children and the parents don't know what to do with them anyway. So it's, as a result of what's been going on, I've actually written a couple of documents that you can have access to. And one's helping children spelling, teachers actually quite helping children learn high frequency words, and a teacher's version and a parent's version, so that teachers could send home the parents' version to show the parents what they could do. And the document actually takes about 140 of the most frequently used words. And I've actually developed a chart showing how to teach every single one of those words. And the reason why I did it is because you don't do the same thing with every word. And I hope that by doing that, teachers and parents can get a better idea about what the English language is about. And certainly learning words is not just some rote learning experience, which many may remember from their own childhood. So over the two sessions, in session one, I'm going to focus more on the learning of words. And in session two, we're going to do a lot more about learning about words, which is sort of learning all of the strategies that you want to help the kids know about as having a go at spelling. And by the end of that time, my goal is that you will all know what to do with any child you come across, and that schools will be able to think as a whole about what you're doing that's very consistent across your school. And what we'll find is that, in fact, the way that a grade one teacher might do some investigation with the children about the different ways that each sound may be represented will be the same sort of routine that a grade 5 teacher might use about finding out where do you put the apostrophe for possessive case, or how do you know whether to use which of the three theirs to use in your writing, so that whatever it is that the kids are learning about, the process is the same, one of investigation, exploration, forming hypotheses, and kids really figuring out what's going on, rather than someone telling them and when they get things all mixed up. So, and we're going to think a lot about how the English language really is. It's amazing to me the number of programs on the market that are totally based on something that the English language is not. The main one being that any letter only has one way of being pronounced, or that any sound is only represented by one symbol. And we know that is not true for the English language. Of course, we want kids to know how to think about when they hear a sound in a word, how they might represent that sound. So we want that sort of work, but we want it to all be truthful, not making things up that end up confusing kids. The other thing in relation to that is I do not want schools wasting money on spelling programs, because you don't need to waste money on that. You need many more books for kids to read. You use the money for that, please, or anything else that you really need in your school. When you know what you're doing, the last thing you need is a program. Now, the main reason for that is because the only reason for anyone to learn how to spell conventionally is so that other people can read our writing. And that's what I want the children to know, first of all, that they're not learning spelling just for some separate thing out there called spelling. They're only learning how to spell the way other people spell so that other people can read their writing. Now, of course, that means in order for that to happen, you have to have a classroom where children have the opportunity to write frequently, not just during literacy sessions, but of course in all subject areas they're writing, and that other people need to read that writing, not just you as a teacher, but other students also need to read the students' writing, read each other's writing, because that's when, you know, they give very honest feedback. They say, I'm not sure what this word is, what do you mean it to be? And that's what kids then realize, well, gee, I need to figure out how to spell. I need to take some time to proofread. There's a reason for it all. It's not just because it's a job to do. So I'm always saying to kids things like, I've noticed in your writing that you're doing this, 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 and this. I'll tell them the things they're good at, and I'll say, I can see something you need help with is, and therefore let's learn about it. And the more that you can make that relationship to, I've noticed in your writing, or this is what writers do, and that the kids are reading each other's writing, then the more that whatever you're doing in spelling is actually going to automatically relate to their writing. The other thing is, in case I don't remember to mention it later, I will say to kids when we do some learning about spelling, you could use that in your own writing. You could use that knowledge, you could use that strategy, you could use that idea. When you're not sure about something, you could go and use that process to find out. And so the kids realise that this is something that does relate to what they're doing as writers. The interesting thing is it also relates to their reading, and I'll talk a little bit about that as we go on. Phil did send you some participants' notes, and I hope you've had a chance to print them out, but it doesn't matter. I'll tell you what they are as we go along. But what I decided in a few days ago was that often when I'm using some sort of PowerPoints, I'll have a lot of detail because I then give people a copy of the PowerPoint so that they've got all the information they want. But I thought in this case, rather than have it in the PowerPoint, I would give information to you straight up, like what spelling strategies do children need to learn? What do you and your students need to know about the English language, about English words, and some resources to help with that. Some basic information about learning words and all of the sorts of things we need to learn about words. So, and then some other resources that are helpful for you. And I also point out some of the documents that I have written that will support just about everything we do. So that this is what we're really going to cover over the next couple of sessions. I've already talked about the first one. The second point, the facts about English orthography. Now, the English orthography is simply the way that whatever system a language uses to translate what is being said into some sort of written form, so that we actually have a way of doing that in the English language. And that written form is not only phonemic, which would mean for each sound we hear, there is just one way to represent it. That's not true. It's not phonetic, one sound, one symbol, like some languages are. But it's phonemic because the sounds we hear in a word, there are ways to represent those sounds. It's multiple though, it's not just one. But it is certainly something we need to learn about to write English. But it's also very much a morphemic language, which means that the spelling is also determined by the meaning of the word. And there are many examples I could use, but first of all, let's think about what a morpheme is. A morpheme is either a base word like play, and it can stand alone, or a morpheme can be some sort of prefix or suffix that you could add to that base word. And each one of those morphemes can't stand alone like un or ly, ly, but when you add it to a base word, it has it changes the meaning or the usage of the base word. It might be changing it from a verb to a noun. It might be changing it from a verb to an adverb, or a noun or an adjective to an adverb, etc. But each one of those suffixes and prefixes actually has its own meaning. As an example, one of the most commonly misunderstood aspects of this is the ed suffix that you add to a word like play. If I say played, it means it happened in the past. So that ed has that meaning, telling us it happened in the past. And so we're always adding ed, we're never just adding d. And that's a very important thing for kids to know, isn't it? Because otherwise they write words like played, P-L-A-Y-D, and all they're thinking about is the morphemic aspect, the sounds they hear, play, played, and they add a D. But if it's because it happened in the past, it means they've got to add ed. So you can see that's a really good basic understanding for kids to have. And think about the millions of words that helps them with, because it's a very common mistake, isn't it? So that's important for us to know. You know, if you think about that's what the English language is, how do we continually help children to know that? You know, one of the things that amazes me about spelling programs is they only deal with the phonemic aspect of the language, and they don't bother to go on with or deal with the important morphemic aspect of words. And it's not just prefixes and suffixes either where that helps. Like a word like sign, S-I-G-N, we don't hear the G, but if I say signal, we do. And you think about how much knowing that those two words are connected in meaning is going to help with the spelling of both of them, but particularly sign. And so we're always looking for that meaning base of the word to help with the spelling, not just the sounds. And that's one of the things I was able to do in the chart of how to learn the 140 words. For many of them, in fact, there were only 17, or it might have been 19 of that 140, where you could only use the sounds you hear, a word like but, B-U-T, you might think, well, that's easy. But you know, it's interesting, one of the boys I work with in grade 2, he was writing but BT. Now he's had 2 years of of online learning, and I think there's been a lot left out, and that's why he's still writing more like I would expect a foundation student. But you can't just take it for granted that the kids are going to hear all of the sounds in a word. So of that 140, I was able to bring in a lot of instances where we needed to look at other strategies rather than just the sounds we hear in the word. Then there's the etymology, the origin of words. Where did they come from? Because that determines the spelling. The English language is made up from words from many languages, right from the outset. It wasn't just there was an English language, but it was bringing together of many languages, Old French, Old German, Latin, Old Greek, and they were the words that became part of the English language. And so that's why we have the same sound being represented in so many different ways in English words, because it depends on which language it came from. It's very important for every classroom from foundation onwards to have a really good dictionary that's got the word derivatives there. And in fact, I was just looking at one this morning because one of the boys I'm working with in grade 3, he spelt machinery, M-I-S-H-I-N-E-R-Y. And of course, he's just thinking about the sounds he hears at the beginning, mish. So how would he know that it should be a CH and not an SH? Where does that come from? And the more we explore that with kids, even if I've got to read that part out from a very sophisticated dictionary to him, the more he would understand. And so there I was. It took me about 10 minutes, but it was a very interesting discovery because it reminded me that machinery is linked to the word mechanism or mechanic, and there's the CH there. But I also looked up etymology online, which is, one of the resources I've listed there for you. And I think it's just etymol online. I can't remember exactly, but right, where did that word come from? In the 1500s, when that word first came into the English language, where did it come from? And it was an Old French word, and it was M-A-C-H-A, and that was anything that was sort of like an invention that would do something. And I thought, there you go, that's where the CH, the M-A-C-H came from. So, and there are a huge number of words around that whole meaning base. So it's interesting stuff. Kids love it, and we need to show them how to find out about it. So they're the sorts of things that we're going to be going into a lot more detail throughout these couple of sessions. But I want you to know all of that. It's why I've taken all this time at the start of this session to talk about what the English language is, what it's based on, where it comes from, and why you must be very truthful to the kids about the language. It's no good calling it a silly language because, O-U-G-H can be pronounced so many different ways or something. It's more suitable to be, and preferable with the kids to be saying, well, why? Where did those words come from that we've got this going on? And, the interesting thing is it's still happening. You think about the words that have come into the English language, like cappuccino, where, cappuccino, and there's a double C. Well, until we got words from the Italian language into our language, we wouldn't have had that as a way of representing the ch sound. Or tortilla, yeah, it's double L. Until that word came in from Spanish words, we wouldn't have had that as a way of representing the sound in English. So it keeps evolving. That's interesting. So, come some of the kids in your own classrooms where English is not their first language could really identify with how interesting it is that words from their languages are coming into ours, or the English language now. Then I do want to make sure that over the 2 sessions we talk about the best way to teach all of this stuff, and also how to analyse children's spelling, because the only way I can help all of the kids I'm helping with online, the first thing I do is say, send me a sample of their writing. So I look at the writing. The more I look at, the more I can learn. If I'm only learning from what they're writing in a particular subject area, I may not learn enough. So I want to see, what are they doing? What are they really good at? And I've actually written some documents about exactly how to go about analysing individual children's spelling to see what they're good at and what they need help with. And it's not just a matter of learning words. You know, you can see all sorts of things that they have misconceptions about, and that can only really be because nobody's helped them to learn that. So we can't afford to leave any of this stuff out. And I'm going to talk a bit more about that later, because I'm really worried that through the lockdown that's been happening and so much for teachers to deal with, that there are some things that are being left out. But they also get left out if you haven't got some sort of school plan. Because although there's quite a lot of things to deal with in learning about the English language, you don't have to do it all in your year level. You know, it's actually quite developmental, some of it. You know, when am I going to deal with apostrophes for possessive? Not in the foundation year, right? So there are other things I want them to get under their belt first. So by the time it gets to grade 5, 6, that's okay. I can deal with that because the kids have already learned a lot of other stuff along the way. So it is important to have a school plan and to map out what you're going to focus on at particular times. There are some things that you're all going to focus on at every year level. And one of those is, why is the word spelt that way? You know, even in foundation, why is, said spelt S-A-I-D when they think it's going to be S-E-D? Well, we can bring in the morphemic aspect of that and help kids to understand. So then finally, I want us to all understand about the spelling strategies that we all use as competent, effective spellers, and that we want the kids to use. And I have to tell you, I have not come across a child yet. I've been teaching for 55 years. And I've not come across a child who did not use what sounds do I hear and represent them. I don't know why the world out there thinks we're not teaching phonics enough, because in many kids' writing, it's the only strategy I see them use when they come to a word they don't know how to spell. The only strategy, over and over and over again. But they don't know about other strategies to use, and they certainly don't know about what the English language is about. So don't get pushed into doing something that does not make sense, is not truthful, and does not deal with everything that you need to deal with. Is that fair enough? Now, I know that many of you are from schools where I've actually even spoken to you about these issues before, and I think, did I not do a very good job when I spoke to you before, or is it because you're such keen people that you want to come back and think about it again? And of course, there are always new teachers coming to a school, but I do appreciate that you want to think about this perhaps in more depth, and the second time round might be more helpful for you. So I want you to have a go at spelling some words, first of all. So I hope you've got a pen and paper ready, or a pencil and paper. In case I forget this, by the way, one of the things that I often do with kids whose writing looks pretty terrible, and that's their handwriting, which tends to affect the image that you get of them, but it also does affect their spelling, because even when they copy a word from somewhere, they don't get a very good visual image of it. Their handwriting is so bad, sometimes you can't even work out what letters they've written, and they don't even know themselves when they look back on it. But I don't know why everybody goes on making kids use pencils. You know, the pencils in schools are cheap, and the lead in them is very poor. It's not fluid. If you're going to have a pencil that you want to be fluid, you need to pay a lot for it. But you need to get your kids using good fluid pens. You know, if you go into somewhere like Officeworks, you'll doodle with lots of pens for ages before you buy the one that suits you. They don't even have to be really expensive. But if I give a child a good pen to use. And I've started buying my godsons and goddaughters' kids, you know, a decent pen to use by the time they're 6. It's amazing how much their handwriting improves. So just think about that. All right, so here's the words I want you to have a go at. And the reason why I'm doing that is because as you try each word, I want you to be thinking about what strategies are you using to help you spell these words. So I've purposely chosen some that will make you think about that. And the first one's receive, receive. And the second one is focused. I'm very focused on my work, focused. I know you're all muted, but I don't mind if you talk to each other. And the next one is modelled. I modelled how to teach prefixes. I modelled. Oh, I'm addressing a letter, or the start of, I'm addressing an envelope, or it's the start of a letter I'm writing. Mrs. Smith. How will I write Mrs. Smith? The next one's recognise. I recognise you. And the next one's two. But I have to let you know which one, don't I? There are 2 people in the room. 2. I've got 2 thumbs. Mortgage. Most of us have a mortgage on our house, mortgage. Often when we're writing, I don't know, details about something, we'll use etc. in an abbreviated form. How would you write etc. in an abbreviated form? Neighbour. My neighbour is a lovely person. And I want you to write this with the Australian spelling, neighbour. Just a couple more to go. Separate. We went our separate ways. Or if I was using it as a verb, I'd say we will separate tomorrow. Immature. There's some very immature people out there these days who are doing some pretty silly things. Immature. And the last one is phagocyte. And I've purposely chosen a word that, unless you've worked with me before, you won't have heard. And you may not have even seen it, but I'll say it again. Phagocyte. And you even might want me to say it in parts. Phagocyte. All right, now I'm going to go back and show you how to spell these words. All right. If we look at the word receive, I bet you were doing that I before E except after C. Now, if I just stopped at that point, it's not a very helpful memory aid. And that's what we're using there, a memory aid. Pretty useful thing to do, isn't it? But the real part of that is I before E except after C in words with an E sound. Otherwise, you will have so many exceptions, it's not worth using. And when I do that, I before E except after C, there is only one exception. I'm going to let you work that out as a puzzle. You'll find a word that's an E sounding word. Focused. Some of you would have written it with 2 S's. And we're going to deal with this in the session tomorrow. But if you were to look that up in an Australian dictionary, you will actually find both versions now. Focused will be mentioned first with one S, and then they'll mention the two S. And the reason for that is dictionaries are actually a record of usage, And so many people have misspelled this word for so long now, it's become an accepted way of spelling it. And the reason is focus, and it's to do with how we say that base word, focus. And we'll deal with some other words later, so you see if you can figure out what's going on, why this is not supposed to have two S's. But if you wrote it with two S's in today's age in Australia, you'll find that that would be accepted. But modelled, if you're writing in Australia, will always be double L. But if you're writing the word in the United States, it will be one L. And we'll also talk about why in the next session when we think about how you add the suffix ed. But all of those words where it's L, we double it in Australia. So modelled, signalled, you'll think of others. There are lots of them actually.
Cancelled.
And if I'm writing to someone in the United States, I'm thinking about my audience and I write it with one L, because otherwise they'll think I don't know how to spell correctly. And that would be particularly important if you were doing something like writing a proposition to give a paper at a conference in literacy, and they thought you didn't know how to spell. So you need to be aware in this day and age that English is actually spoken and written as the main language in England, Canada, the United States, South Africa, New Zealand, Australia. Did I mention Canada? I think so. And we all have spelling differences. And because writing is for an audience, we need to be aware of who our audience is. And also, children are reading more and more stuff that's published in the United States because they're reading stuff online, and they're going to see words with different spelling. And you need to be able to talk about how in different parts of the world, the same word will be spelled different ways. But what's the Australian standard? This brings us to Mrs. Smith. No full stop after Mrs. And this has been the way it is in Australia for quite some time. Whereas when I was a child at school, we had to put a full stop after the S. And the post office actually brought about this change, the postal service, because they don't want envelopes with dots on them. That's why VIC is VIC, no full stop. NSW, no full stops, etc. SA, no full stops. But Mrs., Mr., Doctor, Street, Boulevard, Avenue, all of them are abbreviations. And abbreviations mean the beginning and the last letter are both there, like in Mrs., we spelled it out, and you don't put a full stop. In comparison with a shortened word like etc., that C is not the last letter in the word etc., and so you do put a full stop. And if you're writing on a computer and you don't put the full stop, it'll actually highlight that for you and tell you you've got it wrong. And if you're wondering why, it's because it's a shortened word and is supposed to have a full stop. Now, you might think, oh, these things don't matter. But, you know, I reckon if this is the right way to do it, we ought to learn how to do it. It's not that hard. And there are times, particularly in our adult lives, where doing things properly can make a big difference to what the person thinks of you when they receive your writing, your job application, or your proposal for something, etc. Now, the word recognise in Australia is only with an S. That's a big change for people as old as I am, because we used to write it with a Z. I was nearly going to say C. Write it with a Z. No, all of those IZE words have been ISE words in Australia for a long time. And if you want to know how to find out about Australian spelling, by the way, you go to the Australian Style Manual, and there's a whole section on spelling, grammar, and punctuation for Australia. 2, of course, is TWO. Why? Oh, I could think about the fact that when it means 2 things, like if I held up 2 fingers, then TW is the same as in twin, twice, 12, 20. So that's a really good way for kids to understand the morphology of the word. They're all related in meaning, so they all have the same spelling pattern, that TW, even though we don't hear it. Mortgage, well, the derivative of that word, mort, means death. Engage was a pledge. It's a very old word, old French word, and it used to mean dead pledge. So that's why it's spelt that way. It's the meaning that determines the spelling, even though we don't hear the T, mortgage. And that's the sort of thing where you want to be able to just grab that detailed dictionary. You can get a pocket. You know, I've got an Australian pocket Oxford, an Australian pocket Macquarie, that's got that sort of detail in it. And I could easily just look that up and find out for my kids why the word is spelt that way. And then, of course, we would look at other words that have the same spelling because of the same meaning, like mortal, mortuary, etc. Neighbour in Australia is OUR, hasn't always been. Started out as OUR, changed to OR. Australians refused to accept what they thought was American spelling, and so it's back to OUR. And it's the same for all of those OUR words. The history of that is that there were many more of them, like error, horror were OUR. And when the first dictionary was published in England, they were going to tidy that up, make them all OR words. But remember, there were no computers. 18 of them were missed. By mistake, they were left as OUR. And so that's why they are OUR and not OR. When Webster's first dictionary was published in the United States, they fixed them all up and they're all OR words. So they don't have to wonder which ones are OR and OUR. And it's interesting, you know, one of the kids I work with who's in grade 1 wrote favourite the other day and wasn't sure how to spell it and asked me all about it. And I explained that to her and she found that absolutely fascinating as a 6-year-old, that this is what happens with the development of words. Because I was showing her that the best way to know favourite was to go favour and then add the suffix. And so we needed to know how to spell favour first of all, and why wasn't it OR? Discussion around any word helps them learn so much about the language. Separate, you might have a memory aid because you can't remember, is it ER or AR? And some people say apart when you separate. Immature, well, is it 1 M or 2? What's the base word? Mature. I'm adding this prefix, im. Prefix is what's added to the beginning of a word. So it must have 2. Now, this information about prefixes, that you always start with the base word and without making any changes, you simply add the prefix at the beginning, helps you with a huge number of words. Illegal, illegal, 2 L's. Unnecessary, necessary, unnecessary, 2 N's. How helpful. No guessing, no needing to look it up. That's how it is. And phagocyte, well, the PH, there could have been an F. At the beginning of a word, it wouldn't be double F. So PH, it wouldn't be GH at the beginning of a word either. That some people will sort of say that word. GHOTI could be the word fish. Well, that's not true. GH is only a sound at the end of words. You can explore that and discover it with kids. So it's a PH. If I told you the meaning of the word, that it's a particular type of cell in our blood, I think knowing it's a science word, more people would have put BH. If I say it slowly for you, you're listening for the parts of the word. And even when I said phagocyte, would help you with that middle bit. And the CYTE, as soon as you know it's a science word, you won't write SITE, perhaps not even CITE. You'll think of it as more being CYTE. So the meaning is determining the spelling there, the derivatives of each part of that word. Site means cell. So it's a really good example of all of the strategies we're using together. We're listening for sounds, we're listening for the parts of the word, phagocyte. We're thinking about what the word mean, where would it come from, what's it more likely to be because it's a science type word, etc. That's making use of all of the aspects of English language in one hit. Any example like that's a good one for us to think about. So,
Di, just
yeah.
One question. Someone just said there are lots of rules to remember in the English language. Is that too challenging for students? And should we rote learn them?
Okay, good question, because there are not very many rules at all, actually. There are many that are made up that end up having lots of exceptions. So first of all, it can't be called a rule if it has exceptions. It has to be a generalization. And there are some good generalizations to know. And I think that I before E, except after C, in words with an E sound is a very helpful generalization. But, you know, most of the time people don't add that last bit, so it's not helpful. Now, how would I discover that with my kids? Because if I tell them, it does become something that I think, well, you just have to learn this off by heart. Well, what we would do is we would be doing a study and exploration of words with the E sound. And we would find that could be represented by EI, IE, EA, double E, I, Y, and so on, EY. So then you regroup them according to their spelling patterns, and we get the EI and the IE, etc. And when we start to notice what's going on, when's it EI and when's it IE, we notice because of the lists, you know, we make these lists, we keep adding to them, and we discover that the EI is, and remember, we're starting with words with an E sound. So the EI is going to be after the C. And the kids have discovered that for themselves. And at the end of any exploration like that, I always say to the kids, so is there anything that we've learned out of that that could be a general help to us, that we could write a generalization for? And I want them to write it in their own words, though, so that they really understand it. And then they'll come up with generalizations that are worth using. So I don't even have to have a list of them. Because of the way we go about exploring words, we will discover together any that are worth using. And because they've gone through that exploration, they tend to remember them. And if they don't, because we've been through the process together, I've seen kids actually go back and do that sort of exploration again and come up with what the correct ones will be. The interesting thing is, of course, when you do that, it's when suddenly someone says, hey, I've just found one that doesn't fit in. And you go back and you change your generalization. And in the case of the I before E except after C, does anyone know yet the word that where it's an E sound, but it's the EI is not after the letter C? Someone might. So that's how it comes up. And I don't need to start and I especially will not just tell them. And the reason why I actually saw a misspelling of a child in grade 6, and he wrote decide, D-E-C-E-I-D. And that was very unusual for him because, his spelling was generally pretty on the ball. And I said, so why did you write that word that way? He said, oh, I before E except after C. And, he was writing the word decide, wrote the word letter C, and then wrote EI because you're supposed to have an EI after a C. It's got nothing to do with it, has it? But his teachers had told him that rule. And so he had a complete misunderstanding of it. So I do say, yes, that there are some worth knowing, and you will discover them together very easily, and they will be truthful because of the way you will do it. We're only thinking about when you are representing the E sound in a word, and you're not sure whether it's going to be EI or IE. If it's after the letter C, most of the time it's going to be EI. That's very helpful. If you're not sure, you can always check it in some sort of dictionary or word book, but it's a very helpful generalization. Notice the range of strategies that we used, and that's what I've given you in your notes. What spelling strategies do children need to learn? Because this is the range of what we used to have a go at those words. Some of them we just knew automatically. That's pretty good, isn't it? If you know how to spell the word and you don't have to think about it. Imagine if you had to work out how to spell every word you were writing, or think about what strategy you were using. And this is the reason, and the only reason, why it becomes helpful to know how to automatically know some words. Which words? The words we use most often. If they can automatically come off your pen, that's great. And then when it's the ones you're not sure of, that you're thinking about a variety of strategies. I wrote listen for the sounds and think about how to represent them, because I think we all still do that when we go back to a word we don't know, like phagocyte. What looks right? Some of you might have written a word a couple of ways and decided what looked better. That's something I don't find the children I'm working with doing at all. They're not thinking about what a word looks like. I'm going to discuss that more. Part of that is even knowing what looks right as a common spelling pattern in English. You know, there are serial probabilities. That's why I love playing code words where you don't even get any clues for the crossword, but I can work out, if I know this letter is here, what letter is likely to come next. Because of the common spelling patterns. There are things like AI, OU, EA, etc. SH, CH, TH. Knowledge about conventions. You've got to make sure you're up to date. So those things like Mrs. Smith or etc. That Australian spelling is no longer IZE. You know, and I still see, you know, some people putting out very official documents with IZE, and I think, they're not keeping up to date. Correct knowledge of those generalizations. A lot about how to add prefixes and suffixes becomes huge work. Sometimes we use a memory aid. The homophones like 2, 2, and 2, which one would we use? Listening for parts of a word. I like to help kids to do that when they're longer words. They don't know how to think about breaking the word up. And even, you know, it might be the base word and then what they're adding, or it might even be in syllables. Yes, day really helps them to spell some of those longer words. The etymology, where the word comes from, and, you know, having very up-to-date resources, which reminds me, if you're going to buy dictionaries for your classrooms, I think that buy paperback because they're cheap. Dictionaries are always being republished because, you know, to bring them up to date. You know, just the Australian dictionary that's published every, I don't know if that's done every year, but the new words into our language all the time. Of course, these days, I really go most of the time straight to my dictionary online, you know, dictionary.com. It's there on my iPad. I can check, I can use etymology easily on my iPad when I'm writing. So I think up-to-date resources are mostly digital these days, but I still love to have a good hand printed, you know, printed dictionary that I can also go to. Classrooms, don't buy 20 of the one, buy, you know, 2 or 3 of the most useful, buy a variety, make sure you get a thesaurus, a postcode book, an atlas, you know, where will I look for how to spell, you know, Wangaratta? It's not going to be in the dictionary anyway. How do you spell Ballarat? I need either a postcode book or an atlas, something like that, where I'll find it. Dogs' names like Chihuahua, I'm probably better off to go to a dog book because I don't even know how it starts. So think about the resources are people. If you know someone's a good speller, you'd be pretty silly not to ask them how to spell a word that you can't figure out. All of those things are important resources. And money spent wisely. If you don't just buy, you know, some classrooms will have 30 hardback copies of a dictionary that was printed 20 years ago. Terrible waste of money. Put one good copy of the style manual in the school library as a reference point, and you know, just think wisely about what you're going to do with that. So knowing that this is all what we were doing, let's quickly move on then. This whole business is about learning words, because that's what we're going to focus on today. You know, lots of fundamental information we've had so far that I just want you to always think about. You know, what do I need to be telling my kids so it's truthful? How will I help them the most? When I look at their spelling, what do I see them doing? What should I be doing more of that I'm not doing, etc. One of the other things too that when I've listed on your notes about strategies that we need to make sure kids know, it's when you know a word, how will that help you spell other words? And you need to have that in capital letters, big sign in your room, I believe, because it's one of the most important things. And I've noticed how useful it is, even with all the kids I've been working with. For example, when I was helping, say, the boy in grade 1 learn come, and because he wrote it C-U-M, and how do you think he wrote some? The one that's, you know, like, I have some biscuits. He wrote that S-U-M. So it makes sense for us to learn those two words together, doesn't it? And even though you might have a list of high frequency words, don't just think, oh, I'll just work my way through them. Look at any list of words and see if you can see some that should be learned together. For example, in that, you know, about 140 most commonly used words, there's he, she, we, be, me. Why wouldn't you learn them all together, right? They all have the same spelling pattern. In fact, that's a pretty easy group. But with Tom, who was learning come and some, after we had learned come, then we immediately learnt some. And I realized that he really didn't have the capacity very easily to say, now I know come, how would that help me spell some? And even though some could be written S-U-M, in this instance, as in some biscuits, he needed to think about what another possibility could be. So whenever we've been learning any words together, I always have him think about, now you know this word, what other words would that help you with? And even with something like bark that we learned the other day, first of all, I had to say to him, if you know bark, now how would you spell dark? Because I couldn't even say to him, if you know bark, what other words would that help you with? He couldn't think that through. And I think this is because not enough of that was being done in prep and grade 1, and here he is in grade 2. And I did know what he was doing last year in his work being sent home, and there was no work being done around onsets and rhymes. So he was not used to thinking about, I know this word, if I just change the beginning, what other words could I have? So I've had to help him learn that. So from bark, I would say, how do you spell dark? How do you spell shark? How do you spell mark? Oh, and by the way, I would start with bark, dark, mark, and lark. But I wouldn't say shark until he felt comfortable with those ones where it was just one letter at the beginning. And especially if it was something like, if we were learning, we'd learned bat. Okay, now how do you spell mat, sat, fat, flat? Hearing that f and the all before the at was harder. So I'm thinking about going from the easier to the more difficult task. But I needed to do a lot of that before I could even say to him, can you think of a word that would have that same spelling pattern and sound? And the more that we've done that, the better he's become. And the more that he's realizing, I'm not just learning a word, I'm learning lots of words. And these are going to help me with lots of writing. And I would say to him, in your writing, if you're writing a word you don't know, think if there's another word like it that you might know. And then how would that help you write this word? So I have to be very explicit about how he could use this strategy. It's not just a matter of making a list of words and pinning them up in the classroom. You need to show kids, and by the way, how could he use that same strategy as a reader? When he comes to a word he doesn't know, do I really want him to start at the beginning of the word? I think kids think too much that sounding out means start at the beginning of the word. It might be looking for that chunk that you recognize, arc, and then thinking about what's in front of it, and then working out how to pronounce the whole word. So, what we say influences very much what they're able to do. But then on top of that, I've noticed, let's say Tom didn't know how to write bark, and it was a word, he was writing about the dog barking, new puppy they'd received at home, they'd got, and he was writing the dog keeps barking, so he'd have to start from bark. And when I realized that ARK was the spelling pattern he was not used to thinking about. So, because he just wrote B-A-K, right, for bark. But if we then wrote dark, shark, mark, park, and then I also asked him how to write barks, barking, barked, because I'm immediately bringing in with him how to add suffixes, not just the base word and other words that have the same pattern or sound. That we can, when we can do that right from foundation onwards. I found kids can very easily add ing to words and an s to words. It's a verb, ing. The ed is harder because they don't always hear that ed, right? But I try them out on all of those sorts of things because they need to know more than just the base word. The other thing is that the more we wrote, I'd say, okay, now dark, park, mark, the more he got into ARK, that actually helped him remember how to spell bark. And, even though I've always done this sort of work, it's by working with these kids one-on-one online that I've realized, because I keep having them repeat that pattern in yet another word, it helps that word that they were trying to learn stay with them. And, we still do a lot of say, spell, cover, write, check, and I'll come to that in a minute. But the repeated pattern that they're writing helps them remember that first word they want to learn. It makes sense, doesn't it? So there are many reasons for using that. When I know this word, what other words do I know? And I know very well that if we do that with the regular rhymes like at, ick, ill, it, etc., and there are 37 of them that are quite regular, you will know 550 words. That's really powerful, kaboom, for a lot of words to be known by grade 1 kids. And I'm astounded that grade 1 teachers don't actually have a plan for how and when they're going to make sure each one of those rhymes, the RIMES, are going to be focused on in their classroom, starting from foundation when kids are ready for it. I don't want kids to get into grade 2 and have not done anything with that. I just think that's very unfair. So that's the sort of thing that I mean by don't leave something out that's really very important to do. And you'll see that in your handouts notes also a list of the sorts of things that need to be done. If you don't know enough about onsets and rhymes, I've written an article just about how to teach onsets and rhymes. So, but it's sort of like, all I need is a list of the 37 regular rhymes and I'm off and away. You know, I'm going to make sure that during the school year in some time we deal with them. And the kids get to be really smart at it themselves too. It's all like might start with dirt and, you know, and then they'll be trying to immediately think of something else that they know that's just like that. And that's the way I want their mind to work. So the words that we're going to start learning, of course, are the high frequency words. I don't need to call them anything other than the words we use most as readers and writers, because that's what they are. Do I need to tell the children what those words are? I find if I've been doing enough shared reading and they're reading themselves, that they'll tell me what the words are that they notice most writers use, what they're trying to use in their writing. And so we start to make a class list. There is no particular order in which they have to be learned. Again, I would do things like, you know, if we're going to learn some, we might as well learn come. If we're going to learn could, we might as well learn would and should. And, you know, play and playing are both in the list of high frequency words that Oxford developed. Well, of course you're going to learn them together, but you're also going to learn plays, playing, player, playful, replay, replaying, replayed, because that's the way the language works. And I really want the kids to get that notion. If I know a base word, I could write a lot of other words that are the same, but I could also try writing with prefixes and suffixes added. Don't be frightened to use that language either. You know, kids pick up interesting language all the time, don't they? You know, those kids in a home where the train's called a choo-choo, we'll call it a choo-choo. And if they call it a train at home, the kids will call it a train. So we're down to, okay, learning words from the high frequency list. And then, as I say, there is a really one basic technique that you can use and often referred to as looks, say, spell, cover, write, check. And I've actually described that in the notes I've given you. But I've made a point of also talking about how to do this properly. I noticed with the kids I was working with, I would write the word we were going to learn. Let's say it was like. And I noticed in their writing that this was a word that they were spelling more like L-I-K, certainly not putting the E on the end was very, very common. So when we are looking at the word, what does that really mean? It means notice. Notice all of the features of that word. Notice there's an E on the end that you didn't expect to be there. So when you're thinking about how to spell that word, that's the part that you're going to have to think about the most. I knew about the L-I-K, but now I notice there's an E on the end. That's interesting. A lot of other words have E on the end where I don't actually pronounce it. That's an interesting thing. I'll watch out for that. If I close my eyes, can I get a good picture of the whole word? Was there anything surprised me about the word? Perhaps I thought it was a C and not a K. Did that surprise you? What was interesting? And often that's where with some words, I would even go back and find for them the explanation of why the word is spelt the way it is, so that our discussion around looking at the word is really important. And I don't see that being done very well at all. It's just sort of like, look, if I say to the kids, what does the word look like? If you close your eyes, can you see it? No. Well, you haven't really taken a photo of it and noticed it. And particularly if the kids are writing the word and they're writing it, you know, someone might write L-I-C-E, someone might write L-I-K. You have to take notice of what's different about your spelling and this conventional spelling. And that this becomes a very important strategy for all kids and for all of us for the rest of our lives. Machinery. Goodness me, I didn't think that was going to be M-A-C-H. I wonder why. But that's the part I have to remember. It's interesting, that boy got the I-N-E-R-Y correct, but he wrote M-I-H. So that's what he has to take notice of. And can we find out why? Can we think about other words like machine, machinist, mechanic, that's got the CH, mechanism, that's got the CH. So that discussion around the word, what it looks like, what it sounds like, where it comes from, the derivatives, you want to have that rich discussion with every word. Now, I'm really stressing this, aren't I? Yes, because this is the part that is not being done well. From that point on, look at the word, say the word. And I noticed with that boy in grade 2 I'm talking about, I have to make him say the word. If he doesn't say flat, if he just listens to me say it, he does not hear all of the sounds in the word. Flat. And I have to make him say the word before he's able to do that. Say, look, say, spell. Now, I've actually read in someone's program that they want the children to, if it was the word like, to then say the letters. Now, I'm not sure what they'll do next because it's not it. K, e. I guess in this one they'll have to say I, but they don't. They say they just say the sounds. Well, I'm sorry, there's no such thing as just one sound for each symbol in our language. So if you want to know how to spell, let me see, you want to know how to spell photo, and I said to you, this is how it's spelled. O. Do you know how to spell it? No. I have to say to you, it's P-H-O-T-O. So that is nonsense that someone would even write in a program to say the sounds. Absolute will not work, will it? Use your common sense. Just because someone has written that in a program, don't necessarily believe it. Say to yourself, will this work? Okay. Sorry, I'm going on about it, but it just infuriates me that this could even be there online for people to follow. So look, say, spell the letters, look, say, spell, cover the word, write it. Now, I reckon having whiteboards or something like that, that means the kids could quickly do that over and over and over, really helps a lot. But this is where I've actually found that with this boy I'm working with, that if I get him to write lots of other words that are the same, that I'm almost doing the same thing. So you could do less of the repeat that routine if you were going to be able to do lots of words that are spelled the same, because it's going through that same thing. It's just so that, I mean, kids I've worked with, I could see them walking down the passageway 3 days later and say, how do you spell said? And they'll say S-E-I-D. And that's what I want them to be able to do, just automatically know the word. So whatever routine you can get going for that, well. So that's a general routine, regardless of the age group, as long as it's done well. Now, I'm choosing those high frequency words. I have a plan for when they're going to be learned in my school. And I think it's a very good goal to have, by the end of grade 1, all of the children, unless there's some particular reason for it, would be able to write those words automatically. Now, what does that mean in my weekly plan? Well, even if I think about 140 words over, let's say, halfway through the prep year we start, 1.5 school years, 2 words a week, we'd easily get there. Is that doable? Yeah. So what part of my day will it happen? Something linked with writing, so that the kids can actually think about how to make use of this in their writing. Perhaps work like that should be done at the start of a writing session rather than the end, because then they could at least make use of it, especially with high frequency words that they're going to be using in their writing. And remember, high frequency can also be you're studying dinosaurs. So they're going to write the word dinosaur a lot, aren't they? That becomes a high frequency word for your class at that time. So just think about what it means. I don't have to color group them. That's irrelevant. I don't have to call them magic words. That's irrelevant. You know, it's just, these are the words we use a lot as readers and writers.
And Di, a child that has specialised knowledge in a particular field, they have lots of high frequency words in that field, don't they?
Oh, they do. So, and I was just talking with this about one of the great things about working with children online is I'm able to talk with the parents as well. And one of the parents asked me, it's interesting, why does my child remember how to spell dinosaur easier than he remembers how to spell said? Well, he's really interested, isn't he? So he's reading a lot about them. He's asking for that to be read a lot. He notices the word a lot, even on all of the, you know, when he gets little dinosaur toys, dinosaurs written on the box or whatever, he sees that word a lot. He's interested in it. So, yep, you know, we can't, you know, and kids will want to learn lots of different words because they write about. By the way, one of the things I've been finding is that I've been getting the kids I work with to write a lot of their own published books by using an app called Storymaker. And I know there are others, but this is very easy and very cheap. I think for $4.95, the parents have been buying it and the kids are making their own books. So they have a reason for writing, a reason for getting the spelling and the grammar and the punctuation correct. They're taking photographs. Like one of the boys lives on a farm. He loves tractors and excavators. So Phil, he knows how to spell both of those words. And he wanted to find out how to spell them because we were going to write a book about them. And he tells us all about the stuff that he knows by taking photos. Another little girl I'm working with in grade prep, her story about the king who had a party and wanted to sing songs, and he forgot the words of the song on the day, and his wife came, the queen came and helped him, etc. Great story. She did all of the illustrations. They were photographed, whipped into Storymaker, type up the words, and she's got something she wants to read that's got all the high frequency words plus things that she's interested, king, queen, party, etc. So yeah, Kerry, reading, writing, spelling all go together, don't they? I don't understand why some foundation teachers will have kids learn words for reading and not at the same time learn how to spell them, because they help each other. And you know, and that's why language experience work is so important. And that's what these kids are doing when they're making their books with Storymaker, or even just making them themselves without an app. But Storymaker, because, you know, the correct spelling's going to be there, it really helps them then as a reader. They're seeing these words spelled correctly. So they can have a go at their own version, because we want to encourage kids to try unknown words. And then they can also see what they look like in the conventional form. So easy to do. When we were young teachers doing language experience work, we had to, I don't know, photocopy with a Gestetner and whatever. And now with apps, you know, you can even keep the books on the iPad. And kids can have oodles of books that they can read, ones they've written. Online, when this little prep child met with her class online, the first thing she wanted to do was read her story out to the class. So it's been this reading, well, it started with writing, including the spelling, the purpose for getting the spelling right, and now reading it to her class. The more that you can do that sort of work with your kids, the better. It's all so related. Okay, so apart from learning high frequency words, you do want kids to learn words for the rest of their lives. I'm still, you know, sometimes it's a new word I don't know, how do you spell it? And I teach it to myself. Some words I'll still use memory aids for, etc. But I have a purpose for it. I'm going to be writing them, so I need to get it right. But I know how to go about doing it. And that's what you really want the kids to have, because then all you have to do is include the step of teaching them how to proofread, and then they can choose their own words. And when parents send me their kids' writing, I also ask, could you get your child to go back and circle the words that he or she thinks are wrong? Because if they even know that, then they're on the way to saying, well, okay, I recognize that word doesn't look right. If they can't do that, then we need to teach them how to do it. And, you know, proofreading is a word by word check to see if it's okay. And, you know, in the past, editors would have a piece of paper that they would sort of move down the page because they didn't have a spell checker on there, you know, on the digital version of it. So you're really looking at each word and saying, do I think that's right? Does it look right? Does it seem sensible? Is it like another word I know? Now, that's a chore. So do you want the kids to deal with that with everything they write? No. And, you know, sometimes when they're writing a lot, it's really hard to do that right at the end. I encourage them to perhaps have a go after every paragraph, but just go back and see if there's something you want to come back to fix up. And if you do circle the words you think you're not sure of, then you can go back later and decide which of those would you probably use more often and therefore would be worth learning, so that they make a wise choice about what to put the time into. Or if I learn this word, will it help me with lots of other words? Now, some kids don't make any mistakes when they write. In fact, I can think of one right now who did that. I try them out on other words that they may not know, because I want to see what strategies they would use, because they have very good visual memories. So they'll remember the words because they've seen them in their reading. But whether they actually know how to apply generalizations or think about where the word comes from or whatever, I actually have to try them out like I did with you at the beginning of this session. How would you write phagocyte? Because I want to see, do they know how to use a variety of strategies? And you know, some kids are not risk takers either. They'll only write the words they know how to spell. But I want to find out more about them than that. So, you know, there are a number of things to think about with what you do with each child. And I can tell you that the analysing of children's writing, which I've also written a document about, you know, step one, I go to see just what percentage of words have they got correct in what they've written. And some kids, like a mother actually sent me a child's writing last week, a boy in grade 3. I'm really worried about his writing. When we look at his writing, he actually had 90% of the words spelt correctly. Wow, that creates a whole different image, doesn't it? Especially for the child. Now, which ones are spelt correctly? All of the high frequency words. Great. What about other words that he spelt correctly? Wow, that's interesting. He spelt dirty, few, away. And I was sort of looking for words that were perhaps a bit unusual spelling patterns, and he was spelling those correctly. Fantastic. Words not spelt correctly, words that he didn't necessarily know. What strategies did he use? Sounding out, sounding out, sounding out, nothing but. What do I need to help that student with? There are other strategies to figure out how to spell a word other than just what sounds do you hear. Now I'm cooking with gas. Now I know what to work on. What will I work on first? I think some getting used to looking at a word, but perhaps I think not knowing enough about base word, adding prefixes and suffixes, which is a very common mistake kids start to make from grade 3 on. That will be the most common mistake I see in their spelling. So we need to really start working with generalizations for adding suffixes, generalizations for adding prefixes, thinking about base words, what could I add, how do I build up whole word structures, starting with, you know, perhaps webs, frames, where we can really see how to build on that. Now, that should have happened from year 1 on or prep year onwards, but if that hasn't happened, then here's a student in grade 3 not knowing that that's how the English language works and helping him to do that. And I find this reading spelling thing that they'll have, if they're having trouble with spelling, they're probably having trouble with reading the same sorts of words. So if you look at a word like lay, a child who's having trouble reading that will go, yeah. What aren't they doing? They don't know about onset rhyme. They don't know about looking for the AY. That's A, because I know day, that's going to be lay. That helps me to say it as a reader and spell it as a writer. Babying, they just see this string of letters instead of baby, adding in. Disenabling, the longer the word is, the more even older kids will just start saying, no, I want you to look and see. Enable is in the middle. We're adding in. What do I have to do to that base word before I add the in? What's at the beginning? Dis. Okay, as a reader, dis, instead of going dis, enable in. Helps you to read, helps you to spell. The one big bit in the middle there was learning the generalizations for adding suffixes, which we're going to deal with a lot in the second session. Now here's 2 words, breathe and breath, breath, breathe. I was working in a grade 4 a few years ago, and all of those words with AI, EA, OU, etc. like that, most of the kids had trouble reading them and spelling words with those patterns in them. And I realized that nowhere in the school had they ever studied common spelling patterns. EA is a very common spelling pattern. After SH, TH, and CH, it's the most common. If we look in our reading for words with EA spelling pattern and we make a list of them, we can then break them up into how you pronounce them. We'll do more of that tomorrow. So that when you're reading, if it doesn't make sense to say he could breath the fresh air, then you would at least have an idea that there might be another way to say that word that would make sense and sound right. He could breathe the fresh air. So that's what that's all about. And we'll do more of that in session 2. But I really have noticed always that the same kids having trouble with spelling are having trouble with those words with reading. In fact, when parents tell me their kids are having trouble with reading, I ask them to send me a copy of their writing. It's so telling. These are the major areas of work. Today we've done a lot of talking about, and I'm sorry, it's what I think I dislike most about this webinar way of doing it, is that I have to talk too much. But learning words is one category of the work we're doing. And then learning all of the other things that will help us spell words, including what I haven't put there about the etymology, where the words come from, are the 2 major strands. So when I'm thinking about my planning at any grade level, I'm thinking about 2 parts that are going to go on in tangent. What words are we learning? At the beginning, I want the kids to be doing a lot of that with me, so they actually learn how to learn words. When they've learned the routines for that, then they can start to choose their own and know how to go about learning any word. But doing things together also enables the conversation around why words are spelled the way they are and where they come from. And even if a child knows how to spell a word, they would miss out on that conversation if they were not taking part in some class work. So my class work is rich and informative and exploratory. So I don't mind all the kids being involved in that. I actually think it would be impossible to have a different spelling program for every child in your class. But I'm looking for patterns in their writing that will help me to know what to do with the class. And even if some kids can do it, if the discussion is rich enough, that's okay. But then I want them to be able to go on and apply that to the words they want to learn themselves. How many? As many as they can really cope with well. And it has to include, when I know these words, what other words will that be able to help me with? And so it may not be very many base words that I'm learning, but overall, I'll be learning a lot. Now, I want the parents to know all about everything I just spoke about. And that's why I've written this document for parents. If you're working this way at school and there are words going home for the kids to learn, I want the parents to know what to do with them. But I also want the kids to know so much that they could even explain to their parents why they're choosing words, how they're learning them, when they know this, what other words they would know. And if you're doing that in very explicit ways, explaining things to kids about why we're doing things, they'll be able to do that. The other thing is then we're going to do a lot more work on all of the other strategies. And it's interesting, we actually apply those strategies to how we're learning an individual word. So they marry. And what we need to think about is this learning words is a constant throughout the school. And this other, learning the strategies, the constant is going to be the way we go about it, that it will all be through the same kinds of investigations. So it's a very, it's a no-brainer. The kids can work out what's going on, the parents can work out what's going on, and as a teacher, you do not need a program, but you do need to make plans. So you need to plan, for example, when will the high frequency words be learned? How many per week? What time in the school day, the school week, will you do it? And related to writing, but making use of what the kids can read. So that it happens there. But, you know, so often it might be what happens during your science study that you're doing. And all of the words for high frequency might be coming from there. So you might actually do that spelling work during the time of that study rather than some other time, because you're going to be writing during that science study time. That's when the kids need those words like dinosaur, for example, or elephant or machine, whatever it is you're doing. So if I said, does that make sense? I'd love it if I could hear you all say yes. But if there's something about that that doesn't make sense, now's the time to ask.
The other thing I was thinking was, this is also that we're having lots of reading and writing going on in our classrooms every day.
Oh, absolutely. The time for, you know, and that's why I say it could be any time of the day that this work can take place. When it comes to the high frequency words, they're being used in every kind of writing that kids do. So then, you know, having it during some sort of literacy time is very suitable. I have referred to a number of articles, and, you know, I actually like writing it this way because they're all in answer to a question a teacher has asked me, or me working in a classroom and working with kids and thinking, oh my goodness, we need something about that. And the parent one, I realised during the lockdown, the parents are doing all the work at home and they haven't got a clue how to help their kids learn words. So I haven't spoken down to them, but I did leave out some other information that the teacher will be doing at school. But, you know, so I mean, I shared it with all of my goddaughters and godsons, first of all, who've all got kids. and said, you know, how do you find this? And they all said, golly, can we send this out to all of our friends who've got kids, please? Because they were getting words coming home from school and none of them knew what they would do with them. So, you know, the articles tend to be short and practical. And if you have any trouble, you know, contact Phil and just ask him, where can I find any of this, or contact me. Yep. All of you who've worked with me before know I never mind you getting in touch with me personally. I do hope that, you know, I'm really trying to be just very, this is what you need to know. Knowing about the language, I think is fundamental. If you've got other teachers who are not able to join in this, getting them to understand what the English language is about as a starting point, I think is essential.
Can you suggest a resource for me to learn to teach proofreading effectively, please?
Yeah, I have written about that. Do you know, I've not actually given that to you as an article, Phil. So perhaps what we could do is I'll just, you know, don't need to fancy it up in any way. If I give that to Phil, he could email it to all of you who've come to the workshop in this webinar. And I did find that it was a really forgotten piece that teachers could say to kids, well, proofread your writing, but what does that mean? And then when you do, what's your next step? Making wise choices about which words to learn becomes very important, doesn't it? Otherwise, you don't want the proofreading to become a chore. Even deciding what writing they'll bother to proofread. If no one's going to read it, why bother? That's why kids reading each other's writing becomes such an important part. I think the last part of a writing workshop, you should be saving, you know, at least 5 minutes to have kids just swap the reading with each other, whatever they've been writing, and then there's a real audience, and have publication time, so that's the time when they take the trouble to get their spelling and their grammar and their punctuation all okay for an audience. Publishing becomes very important. Reading and writing. Yeah, when I'm listening to kids reading, I'm also aware of, are they able to read the high frequency words? And I know that if we've been learning them in spelling, then they don't have any trouble reading them, because, you know, we've done a lot of discussion of the word that's been said a lot, and they recognize what it looks like because we've been focusing on it. So I find that they don't have trouble. But I do a lot of demonstration during shared reading of how I can use what I'm learning in the reading I'm doing. And again, if we learn a word, I need to be able to say to the kids, you can use that in your reading and your writing. It's fascinating to me how we just presume because we've done something, they will know I could use this now myself. That's the part where we need to be very explicit, I think. Now you know this, how could you use this in your own reading and writing? You're going to recognize this word, you're going to be able to write it. You're going to recognize other words like this word because we've learned to spell lots of other words like this word. You're going to, and then as I say, I really demonstrate in shared reading what I would do. I come to a word like whack, you know, the tail went whack, and I can say, well, you know what? I can see ack in that word. I know the word back, so I can change the beginning and the WH. I know from words like when and what that this will be whack. You know, I love the way, but it fascinates me. We have discussion. We notice that for words like high frequency words, want, lots of kids don't hear the in the middle. And so I'll help them to learn want and went at the same time because they have the same problem with both words. They'll write W-E-T and they'll write W-O-T. So the gets left out, they don't hear it. We need to think about what it looks like and really slowly sound that word. We could even use Elcodian boxes that reading recovery teachers would know about to identify each sound. The is there, even though we don't hear it much. But when it came to what, want, why is it an A? And it's we're saying oh. And so we found a number of other words where that was similar. Even in our high frequency words, we had was, want, watch, and even what. And so the kids were saying, hey, it's after a letter W that it's often, or after a WH. So then they started watching out for that in their own reading. What you're really doing is developing kids who are noticers. They notice about words when they're reading. And so it helps them with their reading and writing. Because, exploring, we go looking for all the words with EA, all the words with AI, then we notice those words and that helps us too. So, kids can read a lot, but not necessarily be a good speller. And that's because they're not noticing words when they're reading. It's almost like they're reading so fast. And, sometimes the really good readers will do that. They're just dying to read fast and finish up with the story. They don't notice, which is why I don't say look, say, spell, cover, write, check anymore. I say look, notice instead of look. Notice, say, spell, cover, write, check. Spell the letters, I'm even saying, so that people won't think you say the sounds. Notice, say the word, spell the letters. You see how different that is? So, more they notice, the more they're able to read and write. Someone put up on the screen, I think it was Terry, reading every day, writing every day. I heard of a school that is so involved in half hour of this activity workbook and half hour of that activity workbook that they don't have any time left to read or write. How sad.
And that's the fundamental part that will make the difference.
Oh, absolutely. Why is it that kids can read already when they come to school? None of my godchildren's children are non-readers. They got books from the day they were born, and they got books that had repetitive text because they were able to read them and say, I am a reader. And then they started to notice particular words because they read them so often. It's just shocking what people are throwing away these days because someone tells them, throw away those books that have repetition. My goodness. Thank goodness for Eric Carle, Mem Fox, John Birmingham, you name them, all those, Pat Hutchins. Thank goodness they wrote all those wonderful books that kids want to read over and over and over. It breaks my heart to think of schools throwing them away. Sorry, but it's true. I feel so sorry for the kids because that's very common part of our oral language. I should have done this and I should have done that. And even when we speak, it sounds like should of rather than what it looks like. And that's where the only way that that's going to change is reading. So they actually see what it looks like. And so if necessary, I would even write a number of sentences with that, those two words in them and say, let's have a look at these two sentences. What do you notice? And they'll honestly be so surprised that the word is have. But if they're just listening, then they're not going to know. That makes sense, doesn't it? Yeah, and it's a good question. I often think, now, why is that person doing that? Sometimes I go the other way. I give kids lots of audio books because they actually need to hear what fluent language sounds like, and I want them to read along with that, so they actually read more smoothly. So you try and work out what's the specific thing I could give this person to do that will help them with the issue they've got. All right, but it's common, so it's a good question to ask. I remember doing it with the word, there's a plant, a pitosterum. Well, I can actually remember reading a book and that word being there, and I read it as pittosporum because I had never heard the word before. And years later, I heard someone name that plant, and it came back to me. Oh my goodness, that's how you say it. So we all do it with both what words look like and how words sound. Yeah, because it's not a phonetic language.
It just shows you that it's not about the sounds. Yeah,
it is. Interestingly enough, I learned Spanish, which is a phonetic language, as you would know, because we had Spanish friends, and I would translate what I was saying in English, and I'd translate into what I knew of Spanish, and then I'd get to them and I'd say it, and they'd say, "We have no idea what you just said," because I wasn't actually aware of the structure. The language structure was different, so I was putting it together all wrongly. I needed to listen to a lot of Spanish language to actually know how to put all the words together. It wasn't the right sentence structure. So we can work hard at some things, but not do the work that actually helps what we need to do better. But I can read Spanish very easily because it's phonetic, but I haven't got a clue what I'm reading. Anything else?
Any advice for teaching EALD students?
Well, it's the same thing, except that I actually do point out to them the differences that they need to know between their first language and English. And I can remember, especially in New York, Phil, when we were working there, lots of kids' first language was Spanish, Hispanic languages. And I can remember seeing, a 5-year-old write hat, J-A-T. And her teacher said to me, "Oh, goodness me, she needs a lot more work in phonics." And I said, "No, she doesn't. You need to know enough about her first language to realize that in Spanish, the J is the H sound." So there's 2 bits of advice there. Get to know about the language that your children may know a lot about. And sometimes that's many languages in one class. I actually thought it was easier over there because it tended to just be one different language. But also I said to that little girl, "I understand why you did that, because the J is a H sound in your first language. But in English, the H sound is not ever represented by a J. Let's have a look at some words that begin with the H sound and find out what letter or letters it could be." So I understand what you've done. That's really good. You've made use of something you got the rest of the word right. Now let's help you see the difference between your known language and this new language you're learning. I also point out to them things where their first language can help. A word like special in English, in Spanish, it would be especial. And you actually hear this, the letter C, rather than the sh. That will help you spell the word in English. And often the words from other languages that are now in our language, they already know about those, and that could help them with learning English. So I don't think it's a deficit, and I think that's one of the common mistakes, that we think these children where English is not their first language, that's a problem. I rather look at it from a positive point of view. What knowledge are they bringing to the learning of English that will help them?
Di, there was interesting how there were 3 times when Latin came into the English language. Once when the Romans invaded, second when the Normans invaded because they had Latin in their French, and then the last one was when in the Renaissance, when Greek and Latin came into the English language then.
That's right. I mean, if you look, in fact, I found it very interesting that something as simple as Wikipedia, and I just looked up English orthography, Wikipedia came up, and they've got very detailed information about the history of the English language without too much information, because I mean, there are some real scholars out there, and Julie, you're still there in the audience, and you know, there are some real scholars out there who are looking at placement letters and all sorts of things like that. And I, you know, because of you, I did a lot of reading about that. And I thought, you know, how much of that would make it seem too complex for little kids versus me talking about a spelling pattern, O-U-G-H, and we can look for that in lots of words. And I don't think about it as, you know, a phoneme in the language, but rather a pattern of letters together. I think if we talk about it properly, it's okay. But, you know, I mean, I do think it's really worthwhile teachers reading something about, like in the 1500s, what was going on. And, you know, that because all of that you read in etymology, they'll talk about what happened in Middle English. Well, when was Middle English? And it was around those 1600s, and what was happening, which groups of people were coming, you know, having an influence on the English language. I do subscribe to a podcast about the history of the English language. And so far we're up to something like the 290th podcast. I don't think anyone needs to do that, but it's an interest of mine, because it is fascinating where the language came from. But you can certainly see, like words like said were actually pronounced said a long time ago. Right. And I've actually written in the notes about how, you know, you can look at pay, paying, paid, say, saying, said, and yeah, you'll know how to spell said. It's just that we don't say it that way anymore. And, you know, so kids find that sort of information interesting. So it's a matter of what will be interesting versus what becomes overload that makes it sound too complex. Yeah, the Great English Vowel Shift, very, very interesting that was, about how we pronounced words. I mean, you don't need to look at sort of like how Shakespeare actually wrote English, very different to how we spell words now. So it's still evolving. It's interesting, isn't it? And that's why we should not tell children things like A says A. It's just so confusing to tell them lies. You know, kids in the class where they've got an A in their own name and they know it's not A. I don't know what in the world we do to them. It's unbelievable.
And the whole thing about they need to learn their letter names, Di.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I say that in my notes that every one of the 26 letters has a name. And if we didn't give it a fixed name, A, B, C, D, etc., how would we ever talk about it? You know, if I wanted to tell you how to spell fat, I have to say F-A-T. I actually have to name the letters. When we're talking about the sound E, could be an E-A or an I-E or a Y. I've got to name the letters in order for us to talk about it. So that's why learning the names of the letters is an important thing to do at the start. But we don't learn them easily one by one. You know, I didn't spend time today talking about learning letters because it applies mostly to, you know, the teachers of beginning children. But I've certainly written about it just about everywhere. And, you know, it's important to teach all of the letters at the same time rather than one at a time. You know, with my name, how many letters do I have? D-I-A-N-E. Are they all different? Yes, there's 5 different letters. One I, there's a D, there's an I. Does anyone else have an I in their name? Oh, Julie, you've got an I in your name. Let's find the I in your name. Every time I write something on the board or wherever I'm writing in my beginning classes, I will actually write, let's say I was writing today, we went out, I would write today, T-O-D-A-Y. At this beginning, I actually name each letter rather than going to, or even later on, I'm going to say I know day and I know to, so I could put them together. So depending on what I want the children to learn about, I will change how I'm even talking about what I'm writing in front of them. But when I want them to learn the names of the letters, I just keep naming them all while I'm writing. which is different than if I was doing some sound symbol work.
Because the letter name is actually the reference point for the child to know where that, that is the reference point, isn't it? The name of the letter.
Exactly.
Everything else comes from
And
that.
I make a point of saying too, you need to have lots of alphabet charts and lots of alphabet books where the letter has different pictures. I don't want the kids to think A is for apple, but they don't know that A is also for apricot, or A is for, I don't know, what's another picture I could have? You know what I mean? So I want lots and lots of photographs that actually where the letter is going to be pronounced different ways. There are a lot of great alphabet books. And we need to make our own too, of course, all of the words that we know that if I'm making an alphabet chart or an alphabet book, it would be what begin with it. But, we don't also look at letters at the beginning of words. We should be looking at them in the middle and the end of words. Letters appear all the way through words. So, it's just, again, let's look at these words and see what we can learn about them. They're there,